Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. The goal of this podcast is to demystify therapy, what can happen in therapy, and the wide array of conversations you can have in and about therapy. Through personal experiences, guests will talk about therapy, their experiences with it, and how psychology and therapy are present in many places in their lives. With lots of authenticity and a touch of humor, here is your host, Steve Bisson.
Thank you, and welcome to the 100 episode week of celebration. Yes, it is something of a celebration for me because 100 episodes, this is quite an accomplishment. But I've also had some wonderful guests on. It goes back to episode 99 where Sarah Cloud was on. Please go back and listen to that. But this week in particular, and the next few episodes, you're going to get people who you've heard before and you haven't listened to them before. Go back and listen to their interviews. They either came on to my show at least twice, or they were someone who I have a personal connection with, or I really connected with them during the interview. But ultimately, it's just a great honor and pleasure to have them back on. I think that Courtney Romanowski has been on. This will be her third appearance, I believe. And Bill Dwinnells has been on 3 times, so this will be his 4th appearance. I know both of them very personally. Courtney works with me directly next to me in my office. Bill Dwinnells and I are working on a few projects together, very important projects at that. And Bill is just an amazing guy. So Bill and Courtney, I don't think have really interacted before. So I wanted to do that for my 100th episode. Yes, it's self-serving. Yes, it's also kind of like a fun thing to do and see how it goes. So I honestly don't know, but knowing these 2 great people, it's going to go well. So here is the interview. Well, hi, and welcome to the first episode of to make myself happy for my 100th episode. And I decided to do so because I wanted to have fun with people who have been on more than once on my podcast. And I have 2 people who have been on. Bill has been on 3 times, and Courtney's been on twice, and she'll be on again soon. But also wanted to share a little bit because I want to make it also personal. Bill is someone who taught me a whole lot. You guys probably heard him on other podcasts with me. But when I started with the crisis team, I was a bushy-tailed, bright-eyed 23-year-old, like, I'm going to save the world. And Bill was the realist sitting in the corner who's worked on an ambulance before. And he was very helpful with that. But he also really taught me how to deal with people. And I really appreciated that from his perspective. And that's why I wanted to have him on. He's a good friend of mine. And then another good friend of mine, Courtney. Courtney, we've known each other for about 8 to 10 years. And the stuff that we're going to talk about, probably some movement therapy, expressive therapy, and the great stuff that you do. But what you really taught me is, at the end of the day, when we started in group, we did it at a company where we were doing group for a partial hospital / IOP, whatever they're calling it this week. And you taught me how to deal with groups because I've never been a huge fan of groups. And you were so poised and you knew how to change the subject and try to keep people on subject, frankly. And you contributed so much. And just your friendship has just been immensely important for me. And I wanted to make sure I said that on air. So now that I've buttered you all up, how about you introduce yourself? Let's start off with Courtney.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Courtney Romanowski, licensed mental health counselor, registered dance movement therapist. I work virtually and also in Holliston, same office as Steve, right outside of Boston, working with adults, mood, anxiety, life changes, just stuff that comes up. Doing, like I said, talk therapy, but also breath work, body awareness, getting out of the brain and into more of the heart and body and soul of what's going on in therapy. And this is where I'm supposed to praise you and tell you that you're the best. Is that what's next?
You can say whatever you want. I'm fine with it. I would turn you back to the script, number 1. Number 2, I can give you my banking routing number and we can figure out something there too.
I do want to say, and I've tried to find, I couldn't sneak it in the other times I've been on your podcast with you, but you bring up the influence I somehow had on you as being a breadhead, bushy-tailed 20 or 30, whatever year old when we met, and you were my supervisor. You have really been, I think I am the therapist I am today because of you, really, because of just how real you are, and that human approach of just meeting people where they're at as who you are as a human being. I think I had this idea in my head that I had to act and be a certain way as a therapist. And it's just so comforting to know that I can be myself and still be effective. And so thank you for showing me the way in probably a way you didn't realize you were doing.
Well, that makes me very touched by what you're saying. I do actually appreciate that. And please don't go check out the YouTube channel, as I think I'm blushing right now. So, so that we stop doing that, let's go to Bill. And Bill, how about you introduce yourself?
My name is Bill Dwinnells, also an LMHC, licensed mental health counselor. I work primarily in virtual private practice, so I'm out on the Ethernet. You can find me at BillDwinnells.com. I also have a part-time software company that does software for emergency service programs. You should be able to find that at 508tech.com. And in addition to that, I'm still in crisis work. So I'm still a director of one of the local crisis teams. And I would say I really do kind of want to piggyback on Courtney's statements about Steve. At first, I was thinking of giving a rebuttal to it. But the truth of the matter is Steve has really inspired me as well, too, because I can assure you I probably would not be in private practice at all if it weren't for Steve. Steve's the one who brought me to private practice, mostly kicking and screaming the entire way. Quite honestly, I never really thought I could do it until he showed me that I didn't, kind of like what you said, Courtney, I don't have to go and be Carl Rogers. I don't have to go and be Sigmund Freud. I can be Bill. Yeah. And that's sufficient. So, yes, I would like to thank Steve also for showing me that I can be the kind of therapist that I am, as opposed to trying to be a poser somebody else.
The check will be in the mail. I'll just write it up later on. But thank you for that. I do believe that you're great clinicians, both of you. I really have worked with you guys before. And I obviously, whether it's private practice or other projects, we've definitely worked together. People have heard our chemistry on the podcast for both of us, or all three of us, I should say. And ultimately, it's just because you bring different things to the table. And one of the things that therapy has to become, and I think has become in the last few years, is that stop bringing CBT to the table, or stop bringing behavioral to therapy. And nothing against those things. Bring that plus yourself. Never just bring one of them. I'm a CBT. I've got CBT up the wazoo since age 16, but I'm also a human being. So that's what I absolutely love. I have my private practice that I straight to the point therapy. And I have a few people who you've been in my office before, Bill, Courtney, you're there now. I honestly love everyone who's been there because they're real. And if they weren't real people, like they were just trying to pretend whatever the hell they want to try to pretend, they wouldn't be working with me, because that's never going to be my goal. So yeah, thank you for the praise, and the check's in the mail. It's post dated to 2024. So just for the record. But one of the things I wanted to ask you guys is that we all went to school. I went to Assumption University. Courtney, you went to
Leslie. Cambridge.
And Bill, you went to
Cambridge College.
And I look at our experience that we got from there. And I know for me, I've always thought about, there's got to be a course that we can do in blank just to help people who go into their master's program and want to complete it. So the first question I want to ask, is a little frilly question, is if we could add one master's class program, what would it be for you guys? And why do you think that's so important? And whoever wants to jump in.
Well, I'll speak. My program was mainly dance therapy, not as much on the counseling end, even though my degree is in dance therapy and mental health counseling. So I really had no idea what I was getting into when I jumped out into the real world, as far as what being a therapist looks like. Yet we had internships, but again, those were definitely routed in being a dance therapist at a clinic or hospital or whatever, which isn't necessarily how one gets hired as soon as they graduate. I was thrown into where we work together, Steve, doing individual outreach. And I really don't think I had any right to do. I'm settled with it now, but like, so I think a class on like, these are the different levels of care. These are the different areas that you could end up working with. This is what it could look like versus this is what we hope your career as a dance therapist will eventually lead you. So just a real world class would have been nice.
I like that. I think that we don't learn all those things. I had all that knowledge because I worked on a crisis team and triage. But when I remember sitting with people would talk about, I'd say something like, well, maybe partial hospitalization would be better than just put him in the hospital. And I would get these blank stares from most of the people in my class, not because they're not good people. They were very smart. They just didn't know what the hell that was because we don't learn those things in schools typically.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. What about you, Bill? What do you think we should teach?
This is going to sound weird, but I think there need to be a couple of business classes. There's a good number of people that go to grad school to become therapists, and their goal is to have their own private practice.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, maybe not right away, but at some point. And my school, anyways, was very good about teaching the counseling end of it, but there was no discussion on how do you get paneled with an insurance company. What is this liability insurance that you speak of? How much do I need? Where do I get it? Who's reputable? Things like that, I think, were not really included and made us all very ill prepared to go out and try to do our own businesses, because that's essentially what it is. Not to mention, how do you as a clinician get comfortable with calling the client up and saying, you haven't paid your bill?
Yeah.
That's very different for a therapist. But yet, it's a skill we need to have if we're going to go into private therapy, because we are a professional service like anyone else. We need to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I would say that was one of it. And of course, everybody knows that, my big thing is there should be more crisis related classes. Grad school, they kind of, my experience has been they touch upon things like what to do with a suicidal, homicidal, or psychotic patient, but they seem to gloss over that real fast.
Mm.
And I've seen new people coming out of school that try to give very textbooks answers, and they're not as helpful. I'm like, you said what? But so those are the two classes I would think that they would really need: business classes and more how to handle crises.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we talked about it in the previous episode, Bill. I think it's also thinking that if you go to the crisis team, whether it's the hospital or in the community, we don't walk around with wands and going, dunk, you're fixed. I think that's the other misnomer about crisis work. It's called a crisis team. They're going to fix them with a wand. No, that's not how it works. I'm going to add my class. And it's something that we talked about earlier, and I appreciate it. I want to give credit where credit is due. And her name is Beth Ann Schacht. She was my first supervisor when I did my first internship. And once she observed me through the mirror of my first session, she knew me, her husband knew me because we were working with the crisis team. She told me, and I'll always remember, she asked me, how do you think you did? And I gave her I asked all the questions. I did this, I did that. She told me, probably nicer than I recall, but something like, where the hell were you in that room? In other words, why were you just reading the stuff and why weren't you being a person? Mm-hmm. And I always give Beth Ann Schacht that credit because she's the one within the next session I was already putting my personality in there. And I think that there's got to be something we can do to graduate students to not be these stiff, repeating, reading questions type of person, so that you can, do I have a personality? Yes. Do I take my personality and take over the session? Absolutely not. And there's got to be something that we can teach people so that you can be yourself and also be professional. So for me, that would be the class, because we lose ourselves sometimes with, currently, are you suicidal? Do you have a history of suicide? Like, they drive me nuts, people who do.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've seen them, Bill, and the crisis team especially.
Well, it's the question is, are you trying to get through a checklist, or are you trying to relate to the person across from you? I promise they're going to be able to tell the difference. And you're going to have a better experience. They're going to have a better experience. You're all going to have a better outcome if you're able to relate to the person as opposed to just filling out a form that moves things along in some way. There needs to be a benefit.
And also knowing and one of the things that also drove me nuts is tell me every outpatient therapy you've ever had and like who remembers that? You might remember the last few if you're lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people, like, just give me a vague idea. 5 inpatients, just give me a vague idea. It doesn't matter where you went.
Yeah.
And if it was something that happened within the last week, yeah, that'd be great to give me the address, where you went. But otherwise, really, it's just and they don't really teach you how to do that. They tell you the technical way of doing it. They don't tell you how to do it.
Well, I think they focus too much on history. They want this very clear history so that they can come up with the right diagnosis. And I don't think that's super important. Please don't let my insurance companies hear that. But I'm not sure that's really what we're supposed to be going for. I need to, like you said, I need to have a general idea of what your history is. But my philosophy, anyways, has always been I really need to focus on what's going on with you today. Mm-hmm. How you happen, you might have this crazy history prior to arriving to me, and I need to be aware of that. But I shouldn't be using that to judge you here and now, and more especially judge you on how I'm going to treat you moving forward. I need to figure out how I'm going to help the person who's in front of me, not respond to their history, as colorful as it may be with some of these folks.
And that, whether it's crisis or partial or individual outpatient therapy, that relationship really starts from the beginning, like we're gathering all of that information. Right? And if it is just a checklist and a coldly going down each page, from my experience, the person on the other side is already, okay, cool. So I'm not a human being to you. There is no relationship.
Right. And I think that there's multiple studies that shows that the most effective treatment is not cognitive behavioral therapy. It's not behavioral therapy. It's not DBT. It's not psychoanalytic. It's therapeutic alliance. Mm-hmm. And I tell people that's more important than it's nice to have a niche. Congratulations. I give you credit. But ultimately, if you can't relate to people, does it really matter if you know every freaking psychoanalytic person from Freud down to whoever it is nowadays? So that's just my 2 cents about that. So when people go to, like, we come out of school, you talk about getting going to private practice. Sometimes people go to agency work, right? So I wish someone told me what to bring, because, you bring your DSM-5, TR, XYZ, WXY, whatever the hell it's called this week. And then you bring your yellow pad and maybe a plant. And then you're like, I'm ready to do therapy. And to me, that's not necessarily true. So what's the one thing that you would recommend, maybe not one, whatever you would recommend for people to bring into a therapy session as a therapist, first of all?
Ooh.
And booze is not the answer, for the record.
Is that the answer?
No, it's a solution. That's all it is.
Can't necessarily bring it, but I was going to say light. The way I have my office set up, Steve, I don't know if you've noticed this. I have my big computer screen on my desk, but I have my desk away from, it's at the window, but it's away from it so that I can still get the light without it. I don't know. For me as a therapist, if I can get some natural light during sessions, between sessions, and just be able to feel like a human, I guess. That to me is important. Lighting is important in my life for me. So knowing that for myself, I set up my office a certain way so that I could experience the light throughout my time in my office.
It's very spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. No, I think that it's important. You've seen how I've arranged the office myself. I have the corner office because it has 2 windows.
Yep. Not jealous whatsoever.
Just saying. And so I get that, and I absolutely agree. What about you, Bill? What do you think you would recommend?
Well, I think it's funny because most of what I do is virtual. So in some ways, I don't really have an office to bring things to. So I'll get a little metaphysical. I would say make sure you're approaching your client with an open mind and not prejudging the situation. I work with a lot of clinicians who, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, they read the client's history and they're like, oh, well, this client has this diagnosis. I'm like, but you haven't met the client yet. How are you determining that? If you go in with a preconceived notion of who this person is and what they're all about, you're going to bias your entire assessment of the individual because you're going to start looking for things that prove you are right. And that's just something that all humans do. We're looking for the evidence that, yeah, we got it right, as opposed to looking at all the evidence that's there that, may, if you had been open to it, led you to a different conclusion. Maybe this person isn't a borderline personality. Maybe this person is something else, or they're suffering from something else, and that we need to be aware of that.
And I think that the medical field, particularly in mental health, if you get a diagnosis once of borderline personality disorder, it follows you around. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. Frankly, I'm not even the same person I was yesterday. So I think that what we also tend to forget is the diagnosis should be really able to change it, because sometimes after knowing someone, they may come in as depressed. Lo and behold, they stop drinking for the last 4 days. So they're not depressed. They're just in withdrawal. And I'm making it up, but you get the point.
Well, I think also that this is a little off topic, but it also harkens to, when the folks you're working with are asking, well, what did you diagnose me with? My first question is, how will that help you? Mm-hmm. Well, it'll tell me what it is. Oh, no. I try to really stress to the folks I work with that, the diagnosis does not define them. That's just one person's opinion from some sliver of moment in time, which may or may not have even been accurate.
Mm-hmm. Your question is good. I also ask why? And it doesn't matter. I mean, I've been in therapy for 20 something years myself. Do I know my diagnosis? The answer is no. I don't have a clue what they've ever diagnosed me, nor do I really care, frankly. And that's what I think it is like my best therapists, and all of them have been pretty good. They treat me for what's in front of them, not Steve, it says here that you've got whatever they think I have. I have no clue. I'm assuming I have some sort of depression and post-traumatic stress, but whatever. I mean, maybe I'm just a personality disorder. Who knows? But at the end of the day, I really don't care, and certainly don't care because they're just treating me for my symptoms, not treating me for my diagnosis.
Right.
And that's when I'm still working on how I am naming who I work with. But I've tried to get away from somebody who is diagnosed with depression or has an anxiety disorder, and just the symptoms of mood and anxiety or whatever, because you can have symptoms and that doesn't mean that that's what it is. And let's, like you said, Steve, let's just see what's happening today and flow through that.
If someone someone passes away that they're very close to, and I'm not wishing that to anyone, but they just died the day before, you go, sorry, but your program says here we got to talk about your attention deficit issues. Mm-hmm. And you're not paying attention to the treatment right now. So it's really, I'm crying because someone died. I'm like, no, that's the program here. Sorry.
You're not adhering to your diagnosis. You must be treatment non-compliant.
That's why it's a little weird. And, we talked about the diagnosis, and I think that leads to the next question, because I think that I've had clients ask me about diagnosis, and I told them I just don't care about diagnosis. And if insurance companies are listening to me, I don't care about diagnosis. And one of the things I've wondered, and I have my own answer, obviously, but what do you guys think clients should know about therapy? Because one of them is your diagnosis should not dictate your treatment. But do you have anything in particular, Courtney? How about we start off with you about something they should know in therapy? They should know about therapy. That's because they come in with some preconceived notions.
I think, but as a therapist, I don't have expectations of them as my client. I don't I try not to have a preconceived notion of what our time together is going to look like each time we meet. They don't have to worry about me in session and like not giving or telling everything that's going on or sharing much because they're concerned about how I'm going to feel about it.
I think that they have it wrong. And what I mean by that is I think the folks who come to us looking for some assistance, they don't understand they're the ones in charge. Therapy is not something I do to you. I'm not here to therapize you. All right. This is something that we do together. And to be quite honest, you as the client, you're leading the way. I'm just a guide. I'm a guide. So we're going to talk about whatever you want to talk about. My job is to get you to look at different perspectives. But I think the important thing to remember is, and I say this a lot in my own work, you keep your power. I'm not looking to, I don't want your power. You know, I have my own power. But I want to help you really actualize your own power, because a lot of these folks who come to us, they're very used to giving their power away. So they come to us and they're like, oh, here, I'll go to you. I'll tell you all this stuff and you'll fix me. No, I won't. You're going to fix yourself. And in the end, you're going to laugh because you can almost say, like, well, what did I need you for? It's like, well, you needed me to realize you didn't need me. This is all within your power to begin. It was all within your power to begin with. So I think if folks could kind of really understand what it is they're getting into and realize that in a lot of ways, the roles are reversed from what they think. I think a number of them might have more positive experiences within therapy.
I think the only thing I would add to that, and go back to you, Courtney, after if you want, but there's a couple of things I would say. When people ask me about fixing and all that, I always I said, I've seen over 9,000 people, getting close to 10,000 people in my career. How many people did I fix? And most people give me an answer of 20, 30%, whatever the hell it is. And I say 0. I could barely fix myself, number one. Number two, I give the tools to people so that they can work on themselves and then they use them effectively for themselves. Now I do that. I give you tools, but I've never fixed a person in my life. Right. That's one of the things that I remind people. I don't fix anyone. The other thing I remind them, and it's something that is a theme for me in general in my life, is that I'm a human being. Just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean my shit don't stink. It doesn't mean anything else but that I'm a human who happens to have a piece of paper that says I have a master's. Otherwise, you know, I'm a human being just like you. And I have a lot of knowledge in psychology, but I know nothing about, I don't know, cars. And yes, that's not very manly of me, but what do I care? Courtney, did you want to add?
No, it's along the same lines of I don't have all the answers. Right? Like you said, I can give you this, I can help you with the skills, I can reflect back to you so that you have a different perspective. Yeah, the clients who say, you know, fix me, or so what do I do? I don't know. Let's look at it differently. Or
let's call the crisis team.
That's right. They'll know what to do. They'll have an answer. But yeah, so this idea that the therapist is going to fix them, or the therapist has the power to let go of that. And again, the idea that there's an again, I go back to, I don't have, as your therapist, I don't have an expectation of what you're going to be like, what our time together is going to look like, what at the end of the day, I have no expectations. You come in next week and have the same exact thing to say to me, say the exact same thing to me, and we will go through it again. So.
Yeah, I definitely had a client once tell me that they weren't dressed properly for therapy. And I'm like, what does the hell does that mean? Well, I'm wearing something I wore to the gym. I'm like, do you stink heavily? No, I don't care. Just sit there and be you. I don't really care what you're wearing. And to this day, she says that was a liberating thing, because she thought there was some sort of like decorum or whatever the hell we call it to come to therapy. And I'm like, have you seen how I dress? I mean,
a certain protocol.
Yeah, there's no protocol. And the one thing I had sent, because this is also meant that I'm trying to combine people who may not know each other. And I know I've talked to you about Bill, obviously Court, and Bill, I've talked about Court to you, but you don't know each other. And I know you've heard each other's podcasts. So I was wondering if you had any questions for each other. And I'll start with Bill this time if you had any questions for Courtney.
Yeah. One of the things I was really taken with Courtney was, as I had said, I thought that as a movement therapist, you couldn't be any more diametrically opposed in the way that you do things as compared to a grizzled crisis worker. But I was taken aback when you were talking. I especially like what you were talking about with using the breath in your practices and stuff, because that's something that I do a lot with the folks that I work with. Granted, I'm doing it more as a sitting or standing meditation, not a whole lot of movement, though certainly talk to them about how they can incorporate some movement to it, where yours is much more kinetic, where the whole point is to be moving, through the breath and so forth. The big question I would have for you is, what specifically do you use, or how are you using the breath in your practice? And do you have any recommendations on how someone else could use breath work in their practice, whether it's stationary or my guess is for you, it'll be more movement based, but.
Yeah, I think so. When I use breath, there are usually two things that are typically happening. It's a connecting of, it's asking the client, how are you experiencing the breath? Like how did that feel? Which sounds like such an easy question, and it's not always. Mm-hmm. And then really it's about what I like to do is give the space for the client to kind of take it from there. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but there's a huge witnessing piece of not just guiding somebody through the breath, but seeing how they take it. Often I see people not exhale. Being cognizant that not everybody can call themselves a movement therapist because they didn't go to school for movement therapy, but I think can share the witnessing part. Bill, if you're trying to guide somebody through a breathing meditation, like, hey, so I noticed your inhale was a little short. Like, what's going on there for you? Or even the mirroring of it. We had talked a little bit more about the before the recording started. Guiding through doing it, right? And kind of setting that tone piece. There's a lot of relationship building in that, which I think can take us into the next, whatever the next aspect of the session is, or the crisis part is. I don't know if I answered your question at all.
You did. I think you did a great job. You're definitely getting some stuff percolating up there for me to try with some of my clients actually later tonight.
A friend of mine that I used to work with at the partial program, the other day we were talking about something and she called me the processing queen. Just because I do like to give the space to clients after we take a breath, or if there's this shaping that's going on when we breathe with our posture, or even just, again, how we're relating to ourselves and to others with our body when we're breathing. And so, I'll ask the question, how'd you feel taking that deep breath? And then to give the space to then, like I said before, let the client kind of take it from there. So it's almost about not moving in that moment. That's just as important as the movement.
Interesting. Like, it's interesting that you use because a lot of what I do is a lot of mindfulness based stuff. Mm-hmm. So typically what I'm doing is I'm helping the client use focusing on the breath as a way to calm the mind. Mm-hmm. Whereas you're using the breath more to explore the movements.
Yeah, our body holds so much. So if we're actually taking a moment to slow our mind down by taking a deep breath, something's been unlocked. something is shifted enough, and we're giving ourselves that moment to notice it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I have had clients come back and tell me, like, oh, yeah, I started doing this meditation and I've got this pain in my back now. I'm like, well, I promise the meditation didn't do it. You probably had that pain all the time. You didn't pay attention to it. Now this is your body talking to you.
What do we do for that? Like there's just so much that can come from that simple what's going on in our bodies.
No, but that was really cool.
Yeah.
And, you always have this opportunity for anyone who's listening or watching this. You can go to Courtney's website. There is a handout we made a few months ago that is still extremely valuable. This will be valuable for the next 20 years if you want to look at it. So just wanted to plug that for you, Courtney. It's on your website. I know we worked on it together. It is not on my website, unfortunately, but it is available for request. But so a lot easier to go to Courtney's website.
Yeah. newdirectiontherapy.com. I'm sure it'll be linked in the show notes.
It will 100% be linked. Now that Bill has grilled you, Courtney, your turn to grill Bill on something.
Cool. As the seasoned crisis worker that you are, and again, acknowledging that crisis work is a great opportunity for new clinicians to kind of learn the skills and learn their way. What would current you, tell new therapist Bill now about crisis work?
I'd tell him to relax. Which sounds like a very strange thing to say if you're going to go into crisis work, but it really does require you. And actually, one of the reasons why I got into meditation, because it really does require you to have a very calm mind while you're dealing with everybody else's chaos. And I've said for years that what needs to happen is that as the crisis worker, I need to be the eye of the storm. I don't necessarily need to be able to solve your emergency. That may require more special pull. I can at least get you together enough to move you on to whatever the next stage is for that person. But yeah, I think I would tell myself to relax and calm down and just kind of a lot of like what we talked about before. Don't prejudge the situation. Just whatever's happening when you get there, deal with it.
Take it as it comes.
You can always debrief it later.
And we definitely will have something to talk about in July 1st, because we will all be now able to section in the state of Massachusetts someone. And I don't know if you guys knew that, but as of July 1st, 2023, apparently that will be a thing in Massachusetts. And we call them Section 12s in Massachusetts. Every state has a different name for it, but it's essentially taking someone's right due to possible actively suicidal, actively homicidal, or lack of judgment that may lead to harm of that individual. So FYI, didn't know if you knew that, but hey, if not, I'm breaking some news and that'll be great.
Oh.
As we wrap up here, because it's funny because we always do like the pre-chat. I was like, we'll keep it to 20, 30 minutes. And of course, we're like on the 40, 50 minute side already, which is fine by me, but for the record. But you've been on the podcast a few times. Did you feel like you got anything from this podcast or being on here? Or is this something that you would recommend to do for someone or anything like that? Just generally speaking. And we'll go Bill.
Look, I really like being on your podcasts. So I've done it a number of times now. So maybe I'm just a slow learner. I don't know what the deal is, but I really enjoy it because you've introduced me to a lot of very interesting people who I probably would not have otherwise necessarily interacted with much. I mean, like even just having Courtney here today, she's a movement therapist. I don't really have a lot of interaction with movement therapists. No offense to movement therapists, just different circles.
Courtney gets very easily insulted, just for the record.
Yes, yeah. but I think that's a good thing. Courtney, you asked about younger me. Younger me probably would have been very in a way, nervous to talk to a movement therapist. It's like, well, that's not what I do. Why would I want to talk to a movement therapist? Older me, it's like, I want to talk to everybody now. How do you do what you do?
Sure.
And I can take bits and pieces of that and incorporate it into what I do. That's what I really like about the podcast is the variety of people that I get to meet through the podcast, that's my highlight.
No, I'm happy I've been able to do that. What about you, Courtney?
So it took a while to get me on, right? I was very nervous.
And I was running out of money too.
Milked it for as long as I could. It's blown my mind how comfortable I am to talk with others about what I do. Just because I'm not a big talker in general, but what's even more awesome is that it gets me almost like re-excited about the work I do and gets the juices flowing, and then talking with other people, it gets me curious about other things. So it's very invigorating to be on, and just awesome to connect with other people about this work because it can be such an isolating profession. So it just feels good. It feels good.
Well, you guys actually encompass a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do with this podcast. I wanted people to open their minds on different things they might have not looked at, and then start realizing that just being yourself and authentic, not only as a therapist, but as a client, is probably the best thing you can ever do for yourself. So, you guys encompass a lot of the belief systems that I put in this podcast. So the money I paid you guys paid off. That's great. Very happy about that, but wanted to thank you because this is this is an important week for me. I never thought I would get to 100 podcasts, and I don't feel like I'm going to stop anytime soon at this point. And I truly enjoy doing that, but on a personal note, not because we're friends. I just enjoy having you guys on, and I hope I have you on again soon.
And congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations on 100 casts.
Yeah, unbelievable.
You'll probably have to come on if I want to get to 200. So
we'll just rotate.
Right, yeah. Exactly. That's what I do.
Anytime.
Yeah, no, really. Thank you for the opportunities.
And thank you for keeping it fresh. And I will talk to you soon, guys.
Thanks.
Well, this concludes the first episode in the week of celebration. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Bill. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I didn't think I would get that emotional, but thank you to you guys. And I hope you come back tomorrow to listen to, a little bit of me ranting and raving and talking about stuff. And again, it's my 100 episode week. I just want to enjoy myself. So please join me then.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States.